Yo, you guys know what time it is. It's your guy, Just Rich, back again with another edition of the Men Who Cry podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, review, tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend. If you don't do these things, I'm going to assume that you are some type of person that bums cigarettes off of randos every time you go out instead of buying full packs. On today's episode, we'll be talking a lot about basketball. We'll be getting into the breakdowns of the season of each team and kind of the last little push before we get into the actual playoffs. But first, the first thing I want to talk about is about basketball, but not really. So by the time you hear this pod, the championship game between the four nations will be completed. The championship game is between the United States and Canada. And I think oddly, let me start with this. First off, I think that this has been objectively a very good week in time for hockey. This is by far the most hockey I've ever talked on this podcast. And this is probably the only time where I will try and get myself to actually watch this. The Knicks are also playing a game tonight, so we might have to do a little bit of channel surfing. But still, this has been a great time. And I think that for me, the biggest thing is I do watch hockey, but very much playoff hockey. And I think anytime you have any type of sport, especially the sports not with football, so we're talking, hockey, like we mentioned, basketball, baseball, golf can kind of fall into this thing as well, tennis. The more urgency you have, the more stakes that are at play, just the more excitement and the most viewerships that you're going to get. And I think that the main topic of what's happening with hockey is the fact that this Four Nations thing kind of just happened, kind of thrown on people, and people are seeing like kind of the passion and the fight that's gone forward with the sport and how much the love of country kind of plays for what's happening, which is always part of anything, right? Anytime I think you put country against country, there's just a different type of passion that kind of gets played through. However, and y'all can say whatever you want or have you feeling about this, there's just a very much an undertone in like anti-NBA stuff that's kind of running this whole thing. We know that hockey is not that big of a sport in America. It is clearly the fourth sport. And while it's having a great moment, and I think those things can be celebrated, it very much feels that this kind of has now entered this weird MAGA space of which now it's really going to be like USA versus Canada, but a very different part of the USA versus Canada. And instead of this just being something that I feel like could bring in new fans and have people watching, I think this will get a really good number just because there's been so much excitement about it. There's obviously is now and been unfortunately corrupted in a space where just some people are not going to watch or want to be a part of it, or might be Americans rooting for Canada just because of the political climate that has just taken place between the two countries and the kind of warmness that I think the hockey community has given to some people over in the right space that is not afforded to everyone in this country. And so it has been something that I think has been successful while also being something that has repulsed people in a way, because let's be clear, anything at this moment that has a pro-right or pro-Republican or pro-Trump approach to it will simply just get boosted, just enhanced just because of the way they feel the loyalty. And the fact that hockey is kind of having this moment, and that Trump has done a very excellent job at just putting himself involved in every single sports kind of conversation we've had so far this year. I mean, every big sports moment so far, Trump has put himself in it in some way. You have the Super Bowl, him actually showing up to. You had him riding around in the Dakota 500 while the parts of that state were actually underwater. And now you have this same thing with the USA hockey team having a meeting with him or speaking with him prior to their match with Canada. My overall question, I don't have an answer for this, is people make shifts all the time, right? I think a lot of times we always think things were what they were when you get onto planet and your consciousness understands things, but things have always changed. The only thing constant about the world is that there's no constant. And I'm curious in the sense of hockey for this moment. You see all this, what happened with the NBA. And not only did it just have an objectively terrible weekend, the narrative continues for a sport that's happening, right? The NBA only has but 28 games, regular season games left. So we are now getting to the point where it should be peaking, right? The feel of the sport should be going this way, but it just hasn't been. And you have another sport in hockey where, from what I understood, they were doing their best to get rid of fighting. I don't know if this is like a separate thing from the NHL rules where they're allowing more fighting, but I very much felt like they were trying to get fighting out of the sport. But again, casual, so I could be wrong. The idea that you have an ultra aggressive sport that's allowing fighting in now a climate where ultra aggression and masculinity are now being kind of the dominant force and talking point, I do wonder if hockey is having a moment where this cultural space of America and the way hockey is naturally are kind of moving more into coming together. Now, the number one issue that hockey will always face is that it is a climate-based sport. It's going to be very hard to get kids in Texas to play hockey, or in Florida, or in California, or in Georgia. And just historically, if you look at where most of the athletes come from, it's from those type of states, are very big and broad and large states. Could the feel of hockey move to a place where it does overtake something like baseball or basketball? It's just something that I've noticed and I'm interested in seeing kind of how it grows and moves, where UFC completely supplanted boxing years ago, just for several different reasons why. But boxing was in a bad state by the time the UFC kind of came into place. I don't think any of the other two sports that we mentioned, basketball or baseball, are in bad shapes in any way. Both leagues are making a tremendous amount of money. There's still a lot of interest in the leagues, even with some of the complaints that fans might have about both leagues. But I am fascinated to see if hockey can actually take advantage of this and actually be something that becomes more of a dominant point for us, as opposed to having these singularity moments. But yeah, credit to them having this moment for them, and see how it goes for the rest of this season for them too, because I am very much interested in playoff hockey if the teams I root for get in. So we're with that. All right, switching over now to some NBA teams we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about a ton of teams, and we're talking about some teams that we haven't talked a lot about on this podcast. The one team that I'm truly fascinated in, maybe more so for their offseason than their current season, is the Phoenix Suns. The Phoenix Suns are 11th in the Western Conference. They are outside the play-in tournament. They have had probably one of the most turbulent seasons that you can have from a team that had real expectations. And also, by the way, they tried to trade for Kevin Durant. They tried to trade Kevin Durant away. So now they're kind of in a situation where they're very much like a DOA. They're kind of dead on arrival. Even if they're able to make a push to get in to the playoffs, there's no expectation that they're actually going to, make any noise or do anything in the playoffs. And it very much seems that Kevin Durant's done after this season. And you just look at it and how they came to be, who exactly is running the team. Is it James Jones or is it Matt Ishbia, the guy who just bought the team not like 2 years ago? And you just see how this was a team that was in the finals 4 seasons ago. They had the number one overall seed 3 seasons ago. They traded for Kevin Durant. And yet none of it's worked since they've had that run to the finals. Ever since they've lost to Luka and those boys by 1,000 points, it's just done. And you just don't know why it happened, where it happened. You know, it's kind of just how it is, and you just see how a franchise that was able to be so good become ass in such a short amount of time. And so now they're at a place now where Durant's done. I mean, that's a very open secret. Like, he'll be moved at the end of the season. The question just comes down to is, and I think the hard line truth of this is that they're gonna have to trade Devin Booker. I know Devin Booker doesn't necessarily want to be traded. I don't think he did anything to warrant to be traded. However, it just seems to me that there's no other real course for this to go to, you know? And it'd be so interesting to see if they do this, but I think Detroit would be a very nice spot for Devin Booker. You have the young players. You're going to have those contracts left to be able to send his money out. You have Cade. You'll have him. It's a nice starting block for a team that it should make the playoffs, if anything worse, to play in and see how their chances go. The question just comes down to is, what exactly, how is Matt Ishbia going to screw this up? Because that is the way to go, right? You got to kind of pull this ripcord. You have Bradley Beal. Maybe you can trade Bradley Beal maybe in a year or so if someone's trying to get off some type of salary money. But this has been an utter failure since he took over. And now he's kind of looking around, keep thinking that he's the guy who saved the franchise and got it out from Robert Sarver. And now it's worse. Like, the team is just objectively worse. And so you kind of come away from the whole Phoenix situation as just like I just feel bad for them and their fans, and it's kind of just a blah situation. And I think to pivot it over to Kevin Durant, you know, it's so funny. And I want to talk about this documentary more later on this year, not on this podcast, because I want to have this conversation with someone else. But I suggest everyone watch Court of Gold on Netflix. Court of Gold basically covered the men's Olympics team for this past Olympics in Paris. And it wasn't just the USA team. They covered the three other main teams that were really a part of it. They covered France, they covered Canada, they didn't really cover Germany, and they covered Serbia. That was the other one I was thinking about with Jokic. And Kevin Durant has a lot of screen time in it, but the one thing that I really kind of came away from it, and I think when people say that, like, man, Kevin Durant's just a hooper, he loves to go and play basketball, I think that was the best indication of showing how much he actually cares. There's just a moment where he's just there by himself talking with the camera, and you see how emotional he gets. He starts to cry. And it's the first time I think I've ever seen Kevin Durant talk that much since he got his MVP. And him crying isn't something new. I mean, he cried at his MVP speech. But I think the one takeaway that I've had from Kevin Durant over his last couple of seasons is that, wow, this guy just became an adult. And I feel like it took him a while, as it does for most people. And I think he finally found who he was as a person. And I don't necessarily think everyone agrees with that. I think the internet, I think he is one of the core casualties of the start of the internet. Like, one of the people who, quote unquote, lost the internet, I actually think was Kevin Durant. And I think it's something that clearly has shaped him as a person. And I think it's really hurt him as a human being. But his time at Phoenix has just been dumb. And it's just, I think him never being able to find, I really just think, happiness in the thing that clearly gives him happiness, I think is tough. And, you know, I don't know where his next destination will be. If I had to guess, I figured it'd be the Rockets. But you never know if that's even going to be on the table. Does the Golden State thing circle back around come the summertime? There was reports that he said he did want to go. It just seemed like he didn't want to go the middle of the season. So do they bring him back at that point? Does he go to the East Coast? Like, it's just a very fascinating team, and just a situation with him of where he has to go and how his basketball legacy is just going to be, and what it's gonna look like. So yeah, that's just the Suns, who have just been a complete and utter mess the whole time for the year. But a team that's actually peaking, or at least going higher up in the standings, that I don't think ever gets talked about, even though they have a guy who's won several MVPs, is the Denver Nuggets. Denver Nuggets are one of the higher seeds in the Western Conference. Nikola Jokic might average a triple-double for the season. He's on cusp of doing it as of now. We'll see if he's actually able to finish that off. And they're peaking at the right time. And I think for Denver, I think they got a lot of criticism for letting go of some guys who, while are contributors, Bruce Brown, KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, these guys aren't like all-stars. Like these guys, I think, are not something that you look at as like are irreplaceable. And I think the one thing that the Nuggets kind of done, even though they work within a budget, they don't go over they don't go over the tax. They haven't paid the tax, I think, since Jokic has been there. The one thing that I've kind of akin to Jokic and the way that the NBA has set up, and never before has cheap labor been vital for your championship hopes and to get you to a championship. And I look at Denver, and especially I look at Jokic, and I simply just think that this guy is the Patrick Mahomes of the NBA. Meaning, I'm not saying you can't have no talent around him, right? They've paid Aaron Gordon. They've paid Jamal Murray. They did pay guys on their team, right? But I think a large part of this is that Denver's thinking is, look, we're paying this guy a lot of money. In the way he plays basketball, he elevates everyone on the team already. We think at least we can get by on the edges with vet guys on vet minimums and rookies to fill in the gaps of the rest of our team. Just because our main guy is so good, he can lift us up. And also, I don't necessarily think Jokic is the kind of guy that wants to play on like a big three. A guy who's like always demanding the ball and things of that nature. And I think while they face a lot of criticism for Jamal Murray getting that $200 million contract, letting KCP walk, signing Russ, like all those moves, a lot of people really looked at and I think crapped on every single one of them. They've all worked. KCP's not having the type of season that you would expect from him to have. Now, I don't think it was a bad contract for him to get, but I can also understand their thinking of, we don't want to pay that guy that kind of cash. And we have their young guys and Christian Braun, Julian Strawther. Those guys have played a lot better. And the fact that they were right on Russ. And I thought the deal made some sense just because I thought, listen, if you can just run and cut, you will get buckets playing with Jokic. He just pushes the ball forward, right? He's just a great player to play with. And you're seeing that Russ is having a huge renaissance in his season back to being a contributing NBA player. We'll see what happens come the playoffs, and that's always kind of been Russ's bugaboo, but that's been awesome. And I do think that they can win the championship. I don't think we're talking about them as like a team that can win the championship, but I absolutely think that they can win the title. And how this team was actually built and thought out and the way that they've kind of set the path for them going forward, I think has been awesome. And I don't think that part of their team gets covered enough for that, but that has been a tremendous build and a tremendous gain for them and how they've actually accomplished things and gone forward. All right, those are the two teams we're going to hit up. We're going to hit one more thing, and I'm going to be right back with you guys. All right. Lastly, just wanted to touch back on the original conversation we were having beginning of the week, talking about the All-Star game and how things were bad and how it was going forward. I actually think that having the tournament style was going forward, I think actually makes complete sense. And I think going forward, we can have that. But I think the biggest points that should be made, I think there's two camps of people now. I think there are the tournament camps, where it's going to be back to East versus West, but some form of a tournament in that space where it's just East versus West. It might be a 4-team, break it up however way you want to, add some stakes to it, maybe make the home court of the finals a part of it. I personally don't want to have that. We had it in baseball and I thought it was dumb. It didn't make sense to me. And again, at the end of the day, like this is a regular season game. This is an exhibition game. This is not a regular season game. And I don't think that should be the tie into this. But I do think that after, players have spoken about this, I do think we are moving towards it being the world versus the United States, right? And the only issues that come with that right now is we're just going to have to be comfortable with having guys potentially make all-star teams who are not all-star caliber players. And so I mapped this out. I did it the way it went through. There were only essentially of the 24 guys who made the team, 16 of them were American, right? And so if we're going to keep the same number of guys, you're going to have to essentially cut 4 American players and put in 4 foreign players. Now, there were some guys who didn't make the team that you could have argued, could have made the team who were foreign players. Someone like Franz Wagner, right? Looked like he was going to make the team, got hurt. Things happened. He wasn't able to make the team. I am just curious if we do this, then the value of the All-Star and what it means for your career, I think will diminish. Meaning, post-career going to be for the Hall of Fame. And I'm personally okay with that. I don't necessarily think that while an All-Star I think is important and it's a good snapshot of your career, I don't necessarily think having an X amount of All-Stars should mean that you are automatically a Hall of Famer, right? I know this goes against a large this goes against my favorite player, Carmelo Anthony, because he is in large part going to make the Hall of Fame for his All-Stars. However, speaking of him, if we are back on this America First tip and nationalism is like back and popping, then those Olympic gold medals are going to age like wine, baby. Going to age like wine. But no, seriously, like that's how we determine people's careers and their legacies after this. Like being a basketball Hall of Famer can get you into doors that just being a dude might not get you into. And I think that's going to be something big for people. But I think that there has to be something radically done about this. And I think we are now at the place where we can at least try something like this and make it work out. Because unfortunately, we are now in a space where anything new is just hated on and we don't try to do any new stuff anymore. But I think after a while, this has been something talked about and wanted for a minute. I think having it be have it be the world versus the United States can be something to get people back ready to play each other. All right, that's all I have for today, you guys. Thank you guys so much. Again, make sure you guys like, subscribe, review, tell a friend to tell a friend, tell a friend. And we'll be back on this program next week. All right, talk to you guys.